This is Part 2 of Guaranty from Articles 2066 to 2081 of the new Civil Code. Effects of Guaranty between the debtor and the guarantor. Article 2066. The guarantor who pays for a debtor must be indemnified by the latter. The indemnity comprises, number 1, the total amount of the debt. Number 2, the legal interests thereon from the time the payment was made known to the debtor, even though it did not earn interest for the creditor. Number 3, the expenses incurred by the guarantor after having notified the debtor that payment had been demanded of him. And number 4, damages if they are due. From previous lessons, we learned that in a contract of guarantee, there are actually two contracts involved. First is the contract between the creditor and the debtor, and second, the contract between the creditor and the guarantor. The guarantor undertakes to pay the debt of the debtor in the event that the debtor fails to pay or is unable to pay, subject of course to the benefit of excusation or benefit of exhaustion available to the guarantor. Dito sa 2066, ang presumption dito, si guarantor nagbayad na ng utang ni debtor kay creditor. Therefore, it says that the guarantor who pays for a debtor must be indemnified by the latter. So, dapat bayaran ni debtor si guarantor kasi si guarantor nagbayad na ng utang ni debtor. So, sila na ngayon ang creditor-debtor. Ang bagong creditor ngayon ay si guarantor at yung debtor ay yung dati pa ring debtor. Ano ang dapat ibalik ni debtor kay guarantor? Nandito siya sa enumeration. Number 1, the total amount of the debt. So, halimbawa, ang utang ni debtor kay creditor ay 1 million at yung 1 million na yun ay binayaran na ni guarantor, dapat i-reimburse ni debtor si guarantor sa amount na yun. Pero hindi lang yun ang dapat bayaran niya kay guarantor. Number 2, the legal interest thereon from the time the payment was made known to the debtor. So halimbawa, pagkatapos magbayad ni guarantor kay creditor, pinaalam niya kay debtor yung kanyang pagbabayad. From then on, mula nung malaman ni debtor na nagbayad na si guarantor, ay tatakbo na yung interest. Legal rate, which is 6%. So, halimbawa, nagbayad si guarantor 2018 at pinaalam kaagad niya kay debtor na nagbayad na siya, pero si debtor nag-reimburse sa kanya 2020 na, ibig sabihin, from 2018, nung malaman ni debtor na nagbayad na si guarantor, ay tatakbo na yung interest hanggang hindi pa fully paid. Kung naka-fully pay siya ay 2020, therefore, nagbayad siya ng interest for 2 years. Number 3, the expenses incurred by the guarantor after having notified the debtor that payment had been demanded of him. So, si guarantor nagbayad siguro dahil kinasuhan na siya ni creditor. So, may mga expenses si guarantor dahil sa kasong yun. Nag-engage siya ng services ng lawyer, nagbayad siya ng iba pang expenses, etc. So, yung mga gastusin niya sa court case dahil kinasuhan siya ni creditor, dapat ikarga niya yun doon sa babayaran ni debtor. At yung pang-apat, damages if they are due. So, pag si debtor nagbayad na kay creditor sa utang ni si guarantor nagbayad na kay creditor, ang babayaran ni debtor sa kanya ay, number 1, yung total amount of the debt. Number 2, the legal interest from the time payment was made known to the debtor. Number 3, the expenses incurred by the guarantor after having notified the debtor. And number 4, damages, if any. Article 2067. The guarantor who pays is subrogated by virtue thereof to all the rights which the creditor had against the debtor. If the guarantor has compromised with the creditor, he cannot demand of the debtor more than what he has really paid. Dito sa Article 2067, sinasabi na there is a subrogation between the original creditor and the guarantor. Meaning, ang creditor ngayon ay si guarantor na. No? Same terms and conditions except that napalitan yung creditor. instead of the original creditor, si guarantor na ngayon ang creditor ni debtor, and he has all the rights appertaining to the original creditor upon the debtor. Kung ano yung mga actions and rights available to the original creditor, yun ang available kay guarantor. But the second paragraph says, if the guarantor has compromised with the creditor, he cannot demand of the debtor more than what he has really paid. So, halimbawa, ang original debt ay 1 million, pero nung magbayad si guarantor, naging 800,000 na lang by way of a compromise between them, between the creditor and the guarantor. Then, yun lang ang pwedeng singilin na guarantor kay debtor, yung 800,000 kasi nagkaroon sila ng compromise. He cannot collect from the debtor more than what he has really paid. Article 2068. If the guarantor should pay without notifying the debtor, the latter may enforce against him all the defenses which he could have set up against the creditor at the time the payment was made. So, for example, the debtor had paid the creditor either partially or fully, then he can set it up against the guarantor who paid without his knowledge and consent. So, the lesson here is that the guarantor, before making any payment to the creditor, should inform the debtor para naman makasingil siya ng buo kay debtor. Kasi kung nagbayad siya, hindi alam the debtor, as in the case of 2068, then the debtor can set up against the guarantor all the defenses available to him against the creditor. Article 2069. If the debt was for a period and the guarantor paid it before it became due, he cannot demand reimbursement of the debtor until the expiration of the period unless the payment has been ratified by the debtor. So, halimbawa, the due date of the obligation of the debtor is December 30, 2020, and the guarantor pays the debt before that day. Halimbawa, November pa lang nagbayad na si guarantor. The effect is that he cannot demand reimbursement from the debtor until the expiration of the period. Kahit na maaga siya nagbayad, hindi siya pwedeng maningil kay debtor before December 30, 2020. Ang exception dito, unless the payment has been ratified by the debtor. After the guarantor had paid the creditor, ay pumayag na si debtor na mag-reimburse sa kanya. Pero as a general rule, if he pays before the due date, he cannot seek reimbursement from the debtor until the expiration of the period. Article 2070. If the guarantor has paid without notifying the debtor, and the latter, not being aware of the payment, repeats the payment, the former has no remedy whatever against the debtor, but only against the creditor. Nevertheless, in case of a gratuitous guarantee, if the guarantor was prevented by a fortuitous event from advising the debtor of the payment, and the creditor becomes insolvent, the debtor shall reimburse the guarantor for the amount paid. So, kung si guarantor nagbayad kay creditor na hindi alam ni debtor, at dahil hindi nga alam ni debtor, si debtor nagbayad din uli kay creditor, the guarantor has no remedy against the debtor. Hindi niya pwedeng singilin sa debtor. Ang pwede niya lang singilin, ang pwede niya lang bawian ay si creditor. Pwede niyang bawiin yung pinambayad niya dahil sa nagbayad uli si debtor. So, ang lesson dito, bago magbayad ang guarantor, dapat ipaalam muna kay debtor para naman hindi maulit yung pagbabayad. However, there is an exception to the rule that the debtor cannot reimburse the guarantor. Dito sa second part, in case the contract of guarantee is gratuitous and the guarantor was prevented by a fortuitous event from advising the debtor of the payment and the creditor becomes insolvent, then the debtor shall reimburse the guarantor of the amount paid. So, ano yung elements para makasingil siya kay debtor? Number one, that the contract of guarantee is gratuitous. Number 2, that he was prevented from informing the debtor of the payment by reason of fortuitous event. Number 3, that the creditor becomes insolvent. Kahit nasingilin niya pa si creditor, bawiin niya yung pinambayad niya kasi nadoble nga, ay hindi na maibalik ni creditor dahil insolvent na siya. Then, the debtor shall reimburse the guarantor for the amount paid. So, this is the exception to the rule na hindi siya pwedeng bayaran kung nagkadoble ang bayad dahil nagbayad siya nang hindi alam ni debtor. Article 2071. The guarantor, even before having paid, may proceed against the principal debtor, number 1, when he is sued for the payment. Number 2, in case of insolvency of the principal debtor. Number 3, when the debtor has bound himself to relieve him from the guarantee within a specified period, and this period has expired. Number 4, when the debt has become demandable by reason of the expiration of the period for payment. Number 5, after the lapse of 10 years, when the principal obligation has no fixed period for its maturity, unless it be of such nature that it cannot be extinguished except within a period longer than 10 years. Number 6, if there are reasonable grounds to fear that the principal debtor intends to abscond. And number 7, if the principal debtor is in imminent danger of becoming insolvent. In all these cases, the action of the guarantor is to obtain release from the guarantee or to demand a security that shall protect him from any proceedings by the creditor and from the danger of insolvency of the debtor. As a rule, the guarantor cannot proceed against the debtor until he had paid the debt to the creditor. Kaya lang dito sa 2071, ang action dito ng guarantor ay hindi para maningil kay debtor, kundi para to obtain a release from the guarantee, para mawala siya sa contract of guarantee, or to demand a security from the debtor that shall protect him from any proceedings by the creditor. So, yun ang purpose ng action. Hindi para maningil kay debtor, kundi para ma-release siya, mawala siya sa guarantee, o kaya to demand a security. Kasi in the event na kasuhan siya ng creditor, at least may protection siya. So, take note of the 7 instances where the guarantor can proceed against the principal debtor to obtain a release or to demand a security. Article 2072. If one, at the request of another, becomes a guarantor for the debt of a third person who is not present, the guarantor who satisfies the debt may sue either the person so requesting or the debtor for reimbursement. In this situation, there are 3 persons involved: the creditor, the guarantor, and the debtor who is not present. So, what happens is, si creditor, kinumbinsin niya si guarantor na mag-guarantee in favor of a debtor who is not present. The debtor is absent. So, A is the creditor, B is the guarantor, C is the debtor who is not present. So, in the event that the guarantor is made to pay for the debt of the debtor, then the guarantor can sue not only the debtor but also the creditor who convinced him to be the guarantor of the debtor who was not present when the contract of guarantee was constituted. Effects of guarantee as between co-guarantors. Article 2073. When there are 2 or more guarantors of the same debtor and for the same debt, the one among them who has paid may demand of each of the others the share which is proportionally owing from them. If any of the guarantors should be insolvent, his share shall be borne by the others, including the payer, in the same proportion. The provisions of this article shall not be applicable unless the payment has been made by virtue of a judicial demand or unless the principal debtor is insolvent. This section refers to a situation where there are 2 or more guarantors of the same debtor and for the same debt. So, halimbawa, there is the creditor, the debtor, and 3 guarantors. Guarantors A, B, and C. So halimbawa, nagbayad si guarantor B ng utang ni debtor, then B can demand reimbursement from the other guarantors, their relationship being joint. So equal sharing sila ng kanilang liability. Therefore, if one of them pays for the debt of the debtor, he can demand of each of the others the share which is proportionately owing from them. But for example, one of the guarantors is insolvent. For example, guarantor C is insolvent. Therefore, he is unable to give his portion of the debt. Therefore, yung share niya ay paghahatian ng mga naiwan, si A at saka si B, including B who made the actual payment. So for example, ang utang ng guarantors ay 90,000. Equal sharing sila, A is 30,000, B is 30,000, C is 30,000. B made the payment. Therefore, he can demand from A his share of 30,000 and from C his share of 30,000. Pero insolvent si C. Therefore, 2073 says that the share of the insolvent shall be borne by the remaining guarantors. So, yung 30,000 ni C, dahil siya ay insolvent, ay paghahatian ngayon ni A at saka ni B. Yun ang second paragraph. The provisions of this article will apply only under two situations. If the payment was made by virtue of a judicial demand, kinasuhan na sila kaya sila nagbayad, or the principal debtor is already insolvent. So yun ang situations where the scenario under 2073 would be applicable. Article 2074. In the case of the preceding article, the co-guarantors may set up against the one who paid the same defenses which would have pertained to the principal debtor against the creditor and which are not purely personal to the debtor. So, what defenses may be set up by the guarantor against his co-guarantors? So, for example, the defenses of payment that the debtor had already paid the creditor, or fraud, or prescription, remission, illegality, and other defenses that are inherent in the obligation, but not personal defenses like minority. Article 2075. A sub-guarantor, in case of the insolvency of the guarantor for whom he bound himself, is responsible to the co-guarantors in the same terms as the guarantor. So, ang situation sa 2075, there are several guarantors, halimbawa, guarantors A, B, and C, and then one of them, for example, guarantor B has a sub-guarantor. May guarantor sa ilalim ni guarantor B. Now, in the event of the insolvency of guarantor B, his sub-guarantor will be liable to guarantor A and guarantor C. Extinguishment of guarantee. Article 2076. The obligation of the guarantor is extinguished at the same time as that of the debtor, and for the same causes as all other obligations. Under the law on obligations and contracts, there are several ways of extinguishing an obligation, and the first of which is payment. So, under 2076, it says the obligation of the guarantor is extinguished at the same time as that of the debtor. So, kung si debtor nagbayad na kay creditor, then extinguished na ang kanyang obligation by way of payment. Then it means that the obligation of the guarantor or guarantors are likewise extinguished. So the other ways of extinguishing an obligation under the law are loss of the thing due, condonation or remission of the debt, confusion or merger of the rights of the creditor and debtor, compensation, and novation. Article 2077. If the creditor voluntarily accepts immovable or other property in payment of the debt, even if he should afterwards lose the same through eviction, the guarantor is released. So this is another way to release the guarantor from his obligation if the creditor accepts unimmovable as payment from the debtor. So remember, they should be unimmovable. So this is in the nature or in the concept of dasyon in pago. Binayaran ni debtor si creditor, kaya lang yung pambayad niya ay immovable. So halimbawa, si debtor ay nagbayad ng isang parcel of land kay creditor bilang bayad niya sa kanyang utang, then that should release also the guarantor from his obligation in the contract of guarantee. Nakalagay dito, even if he should afterward lose the same through eviction. So halimbawa, pagkatapos niyang tanggapin yung isang parcel of land bilang kabayaran, later on, may nag-claim at napatunayan na yun pala ay pag-aari ng ibang tao, that will not revive the contract of guarantee. Although it may revive the contract of loan or the contract between the creditor and the debtor, his eviction will revive the contract between the creditor and the debtor, but not the contract of guarantee. Release na si guarantor the moment the creditor accepts an immovable as payment from the debtor, even if he should afterwards lose the same through eviction. Kahit mawala sa kanya yung lupain yun dahil may nag-claim at napatunayan na yung pala'y pag-aari ng ibang tao, pero yung contract of guarantee, hindi na siya nare-revive. Article 2078. A release made by the creditor in favor of one of the guarantors without the consent of the others benefits all to the extent of the share of the guarantor to whom it has been granted. So, ang situation dito sa 2078, there are several guarantors, for example, guarantors A, B, and C. And the debt that they guarantee is like 900,000. So, 900,000. Tigi 300,000 bawat guarantor. Kaya lang, yung isang guarantor, ni-release ni creditor. Halimbawa, pamangkin niya yung isang guarantor. So, sabi ni creditor, o pamangkin, inire-release na kita, wala ka ng liability sa akin. So, out of the 900,000 debt, ang naiwan lang na sa guarantors ay 600 lang, yung kay A, saka yung kay C, kasi nirelease si B. Anong effect noon sa dalawang remaining guarantors? If the release by the creditor of one of the guarantors is without the consent of the others, in other words, di naman kinuha yung permiso o yung consent ni at saka si C. Basta na lang ni-release ni creditor yung isa sa mga guarantors, si B. Then it will benefit them to the extent of the share of the guarantor. Meaning, yung 1/3 ng liability ni A ay mawawala din, marirelease din, at yung 1/3 ng liability ni C mawawala din. So, ang maiiwang liability ni guarantor A is only 200,000. At ang maiiwang liability ni guarantor C is only 200,000. Kasi yung 1/3 ng kanilang liability ay nawala din kasi yun ay benefit nila. Dahil yung isang guarantor ay na-release from the contract of guarantee without their consent. Article 2079. An extension granted to the debtor by the creditor without the consent of the guarantor extinguishes the guarantee. The mere failure on the part of the creditor to demand payment after the debt has become due does not of itself constitute any extension of time referred to herein. So this is another way for the guarantor to get out of the contract of guarantee if the creditor gives an extension of time to the debtor. So halimbawa, ang due date ng utang ni debtor ay June 30, 2020. Pero binigyan ng extension na hindi alam ni guarantor, hindi siya nagbigay ng consent niya. Bigla na lang niyang nalaman na binigyan ni creditor ng extension si debtor up to December 30, 2020. Siguro nakiusap si debtor, pwede bang bigyan mo ko ng 6-month extension? O sige, sabi ni creditor, magbayad ka na lang sa December 30, 2020. That extension of time granted to the debtor without the consent of the guarantor will extinguish the contract of guarantee. So, released ang guarantor doon. Wala na siyang kinalaman. So, this is another way, aside from those that we discussed, of releasing the guarantor from his liability. Article 2080, the guarantors, even though they be solidary, are released from their obligation whenever by some act of the creditor they cannot be subrogated to the rights, mortgages, and preferences of the latter. So this is another way by which the guarantor can get out of his liability under the contract of guarantee. Paano yun? Sabi dito, whenever by some act of the creditor, they cannot be subrogated to the rights, mortgages, and preference of the latter. So, anong action halimbawa? For example, the creditor releases the mortgage or fails to register the mortgage. Then, the guarantor is released from his liability because in that case, he cannot be subrogated to the rights of the mortgages in the event that he is made to pay for the debt of the debtor. Article 2081. The guarantor may set up against the creditor all the defenses which pertain to the principal debtor and are inherent in the debt, but not those that are personal to the debtor. End of Part 2.